Hi folks, this is Donald. Well now, this sketch went in an unexpected direction from what I was planning, because just as I was about to start the sketch I realised that I had left my putty eraser at my parents' house. I'd been visiting them at the weekend and I'd been doing a bit of sketching. I'd left some things behind, including my eraser, which means I wasn't going to be able to rub out the pencil lines. And I am always a pencil planner. I plan out my sketches in pencil first and then draw over them with ink, and then I would rub out the pencil lines afterwards. So what was I going to do? Well, I had no choice but to jump straight in with the ink and just hope and pray for the best. So the way I approached this was to start from foreground to background and just try and repeat the sort of things that I normally do, except now I had no guidelines to follow. I had nothing to tell me where things should go. So the first thing I did was I drew in the edge of the pavement or sidewalk, depending on what part of the world you're from, and then I decided that instead of having pencil marks I would do little dots around the page to mark where the sides and the base and the top of the building might go. The problem with this is if you mark these dots in the wrong place, then they are going to show up if you don't then cover them up later with the ink. But I thought I need some kind of indication of where things will be, so this is what I tried, and spoiler alert, it was mostly successful doing this technique. And if you've never tried sketching without a pencil yourself, maybe you could try this method and see if it works for you. Just do a few dots around the page and then go straight in with the drawing. So now that I was reasonably comfortable with what the scale of the sketch was going to be, I start with the foreground items. So there's the plant pots and the little pillars. And then I decided to try and keep things as simple as possible. I would do the central column of the building and then try and work my way out sideways and upwards from that. This is slightly different to how I would normally work, but this was a lot of just trial and error, figuring things out as I was going along. So then there was a railing in front of the doorway, and I always have to draw things in front of other things, if you see what I mean. So I draw the railings and then the doorway that goes behind it. The railings are in the same colour as the door, so it might not be terribly clear that they're there, but they are. And what I found very interesting about this way of working is that it forced me to concentrate more on the scene and less on the page, which I didn't expect. And so the drawing itself, I felt, was better than a lot of the sketches I've been doing lately. I had to stop, I had to think more, I was not so much following the pencil lines because obviously there aren't any. The downside that I found for doing this is that it did make the sketch take longer than it would have, ironically, because with a pencil sketch that would take maybe a minute or so, not having that probably meant that I spent another 20 minutes doing the drawing because I was having to be more cautious and take a bit longer to study the scene and decide what part I was going to draw next and where this line was going to stop, etc. So it's adding more time to a sketching style that already takes me quite a while anyway. I suppose if it's going to make my drawings better because I'm concentrating more on the scene, then I think it's probably something that I would continue doing. Now the hardest part of the whole sketch I found was this little staircase. If you know my sketches and the way I've talked about staircases before, these are my mortal enemy. I cannot stand drawing staircases, simply because I could never get them right. Once in a blue moon I do manage to, and I had real difficulty because these stairs in particular are curved. That made it even harder. I was getting into a bit of a muddle on the left side of the stairs, and you have to draw the railings first before you draw the steps, which makes it even harder. Fortunately, there's a little bush to the left-hand side of the staircase, so I was able to hide the part that wasn't really looking right by just doing some curly bush type lines. So that was a bit of luck. And things like having the little plant pot holder that sticks out from the building, I had to make sure that I was stopping before I got to that point so that I could draw that in and then continue on down the wall. Otherwise you'd have lines cutting through the plant pot holder and that wouldn't look right, it would spoil the effect. And it's harder when you don't have that pencil guide to follow there, because in my pre-pencil sketch I would have marked in where that went, so I would know to stop there. As I said, I really had to concentrate more on the scene and make sure that I was stopping in the right place. But what I'm most intrigued about hearing from you is, how do you approach your sketches? Do you pencil plan? Are you a meticulous planner? Do you do a really loose pencil sketch before you start in with the ink, or do you just go straight in with the ink, no plan whatsoever? I'm fascinated about different techniques because everyone seems to have their own way, and it does seem to also be dependent on the type of sketching that you do. If you have a really scribbly, scratchy style where lines can crisscross over each other, it's maybe less important to do a plan than if you are going for the solid lines where nothing can cross over type of drawing that I do. So yeah, do let me know. I'm fascinated to hear how you approach your sketching. I found this quite liberating, and I want to see if I can try it again in other sketches if I'm brave enough, and find out whether this was just a complete fluke, a one-off, or whether I can do this repeatedly without having to plan so much. Then I decided, because the building has some red on it, this one is going to feature some colour. So I've got my India ink markers in different colours. This is scarlet red, and I wanted to try and keep it minimal. I mostly do grey and white sketches. I decided to stick to that and just one or two embellishments. So there's more red in the picture than there is in the scene, but not huge amounts. I moved on to the cold grey set of India ink brush pen markers that I have, the soft brushes. This is cold grey 1 to start with. I'm adding in the base layer of ink, and then I will go over some of that to get it a little bit darker and create a bit more contrast. But I really like the effect of adding the colour. I very rarely do this, and I could have just done the whole scene in grey and white shades, even the parts that are red, and it would have looked fine. But there was something about adding the colour that makes it pop. It makes it a bit more fun, I thought. And since my sketching style, the way I like to sketch, is about trying to have fun and trying to embrace the childlike spirit of doing drawings like this, adding more colour and brightness to it really seems to fit, and it's something I want to explore more. I think it just seems like the obvious direction to go now, but how far that will go, whether it will become full colour sketches or whether I will keep this mix, I'm not entirely sure. It's going to be a case of just continuing to experiment and seeing where it goes. So I then added in the second layer of contrast that brings things forward, makes things jump out, and I was adding that with the cold grey 3 marker over the top of some of the sections that I've already shaded in the lightest shade. And I really liked the way this was coming together, so I was desperate not to go overboard. And one of the things I actually did was, because I hadn't done a pencil plan, for this one I decided I would draw the main building and then I would decide later on whether to go back in and draw the surrounding buildings and the surrounding streets. I was liking the way this was turning out so much that I just decided to leave it as a solo building and have lots of white space around about, rather than packing in loads of detail and spending another couple of hours doing this. And this is another thing that I want to do more, is just pick a building and isolate it and have lots of white space. Now, one of the consequences of doing the dotty method for planning out the sketch was that at the end, once I'd drawn it all in, there were a couple of dots that I'd marked that didn't end up being where the lines went. They were kind of standing out to me a bit. They were too far away from the building to be able to hide them. So how I got around that was I just used my Signal white gel pen and I just covered over the little dots like you would with correction fluid at school. Same idea, and then the little dots just disappeared. Another problem solved. I was fully expecting this to be another one of these videos that I do of, oh well, this one didn't go very well, but I'm posting it anyway. I was actually quite surprised at myself that I managed to do this, because maybe just under a year and a half now since I started sketching, and this is the first time that I've even tried this. But with all my wibbly wobbly lines, it came together fairly well. I was quite shocked and surprised. And for more sketchy inspiration like this, you can click on this video right here, and I will see you in the next one.